Hello and welcome to CX Today. My name is Charlie, and today I'm joined by three excellent customer experience analysts to discuss the latest news from across the space. Yesterday, I am joined by Rebecca Wettemann, principal at Valoir, Michael Fauscette, founder and CEO and chief analyst at Arion Research, and Cameron Marsh, research analyst at Nucleus Research. It's great to have you all join us, and I'm really excited to get straight into this news. But I'm going to start off, as I usually do on these shows, on more of a negative note, and that is the Silicon Valley bank collapse, which happened a couple of weeks ago now. I think it's an interesting one to investigate how this may impact the CX space and the tech vendors within it, maybe the impact beyond. I don't know if anybody has any kind of thoughts to start this conversation on.
Well, what do you get when you combine arrogance and ignorance, or blissful ignorance, right? You get a lot of loss of value. And I think that what we're seeing is capital is going to be more difficult to access, which means we're going to look at valuations differently, and we're going to look at folks that have been spending money to acquire customers in a different way.
Yeah, I mean, you think about this is a symptom, and it's a really the whole credit crunch, the interest problems, the interest rates rise. This is like the end of the 2008 to now run that was, free money, and everybody that had a startup could, with an MVP could get a loan, a funding round, a whatever. And I think this is going to be tough right now for anybody. And I've heard from several friends that are trying to raise money that they're knocking on doors and nobody's answering.
Mm-hmm. I've heard the same thing too. And I think the other sad thing is these startups now have to think about cash management in a completely different way too, right? Because it's not just being able to manage your money, it's having it in different places and making sure that you can access it to run payroll. That just adds a whole nother layer of things they need to worry about.
Yeah, that's a complicated one. Nobody's certainly used to that. And I don't know if you saw, but today that they just announced, or maybe over the weekend, they'd come to a deal with First Citizens to acquire some of the assets, like $72 billion in assets for $16.5 billion, which I guess is a pretty good deal.
Yeah. And I think it goes to show too that, like you guys said, you're knocking on the door, no one's answering. So, for these vendors that are struggling, when someone does answer the door, the kind of deal they're going to get isn't going to be very good. Pointedly, I think it could lead to, some consolidation, maybe some bigger fish kind of swallowing up some smaller fish. These small struggling vendors could very well, you could see them, be acquired by, I guess the bigger players in that space. So it'll be really interesting to see kind of what happens there.
Yeah, I mean, you expect tuck-ins, right? And it's easy to see, you can acquire some customers even if you're in the same space and maybe you don't want the technology, but if you can get it really cheap, why would you not?
Buy the customers. Yep,
exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's going to be a fascinating one to keep an eye on, as you say, to see how it goes. Fingers crossed it doesn't. I mean, it's the startups really that I imagine, as you've all pointed out, this is going to hit hard. But yeah, definitely one to keep an eye on. And just maybe switching gears a little bit, some more maybe more of the more negative news now, and that's kind of Meta's plans to offload customer its CRM solution. It's interesting because it's only about a year ago since the acquisition was made. Did this maybe surprise any of you?
I mean, it's not the. I always wonder it's not the greatest fit. I mean, I know why they did it, but they're really more focused around their public messaging apps and the way that connects in. And I know they must have thought that this would be an on-ramp for that, but I don't think that's really worked out. I heard the two founders were actually trying to get money to buy it back.
Interesting. Yeah. Everything I read about it was basically just Meta, similar to some other thing that I think we're about to talk about, right, is more just focusing on what they do well, right? I mean, something like 98% of Meta's, revenue comes from advertisements. And I think, Mike was exactly right, Marissa. It wasn't maybe a great fit. I know their main priority right now is, like Mike said, monetizing WhatsApp specifically. And, I don't think customer was really maybe best suited to enable them to carry out that value, adventure.
Well, it's interesting. I just finished a consumer communication survey for a client, and without going into the details of the data, I will tell you that public messaging came out last or near last on every survey to say we don't really want to use that for business communication, or if we do, we don't really trust it for doing certain things.
That's the point here, Mike, right? This is about trust, right? From the company that sold your data, marketed your data, everything else. Are you going to trust them with your business data? And the answer is no.
No, I mean, and I'm going to give you my entire customer database. Maybe not.
Yeah, maybe not.
Yeah, it's an interesting one as well. I also think maybe part of what held it back was how long the deal took to complete. I mean, I think from when they first made the offer for customer, it took almost over a year for it to go through regulatory approval for the for the reasons which Rebecca you probably alluded to.
Yeah, which tells you something, right? I mean, if it took that long to get approval to begin with.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I think that's a great overview of that situation. I also wanted to talk about another acquisition. And that was from some investment firms. I believe they're called Silver Lake and CPP Investments. They announced that they're going to acquire Qualtrics of $12.5 billion. Do any of you have any thoughts on how this could impact Qualtrics as a business and its kind of status as voice of the customer, as a voice of the customer leader?
Well, I don't want to SAP bash, so I won't spend much time there. But let's just say that there is a history of perhaps their larger acquisitions underperforming. And in fact, if you remember a couple of years ago, they spun out some of those into a separate entity to see if that would work better and move it away from the core management, the core products. So I mean, some of that is just purely underperformance, I think, by Qualtrics, and maybe that's underinvestment by SAP. I don't know, but it's an interesting one to watch for sure.
Well, Qualtrics is a great tool.
Yeah.
Right, but there are a lot of competing tools out there, and the other thing too is the survey is on its way out. Right, as much as we talk about voice of the customer, if I can actually record, analyze, and provide an understanding of the sentiment on the data in real time, why am I irritating customers with surveys?
Yeah.
So the idea that there's a market opportunity moving forward for survey analysis tool, if it's data mining, analyzing that data and being able to spin it back, great. But if it's just building surveys and then trying to get customers or employees to take them, that's on the way out.
Yeah, I think you're right, Rebecca. And I think this whole, we really haven't talked a lot about real time in CX over the last few years, but I think that's going to be the number one topic going forward, because if you can, and you can digital twin that data and test your responses in real time before you make them. I mean, why would you not go that direction? Why would you go back to historical analysis when you can have real time analysis?
Right.
Yeah, it's interesting as well, because I think that they brought Clarabridge a few years ago, but they still sell that as a separate solution, I believe. So it's almost like they haven't kind of built it into their model. And although that 12.5 billion is I think SAP bought it for about 8 billion. So it's I know they only own, I think, 70% of it now, but still they've managed to almost do quite a good bit of business through it going completely against their original plans. In a way, it was a very good bit of business. But yeah, I think that's going to be another interesting one to follow, actually, to see. I actually was doing a story on the forested wave report, and Qualtrics actually fell down that medallion. I think were the only leader in the space they put. So I mean, obviously it's a certain report, but it gives a good, interesting bit of overview. Anyway, I think that's maybe enough on that one. I think there's some other really great news also coming out in the space, and I think maybe one of the most eye-catching was everything that's going on with Salesforce, with it launching its first generative AI for CRM. I think this is going to be something we're going to see a lot about. But do any of you have any kind of thoughts on that announcement?
I guess my initial thought of that announcement is a lot of the Salesforce marketing materials around that were, not our first, but the first generative AI for CRM. And I don't think that was technically true, right? Microsoft announced theirs maybe a week earlier, and I think HubSpot announced it on the same day. But I think it means a lot for a lot of folks. I think that it's still way too soon to tell what the long-term benefits are going to be. I mean, these are all still in beta, and coming from like a practical experience myself, there's obviously tons of use cases across all of CX, right? It's going to be the use cases for salespeople and maybe some marketing folks and even customer service reps is going to be very different. At least like my core experience, and I'd love Rebecca and maybe Michael to weigh in on this too. But the current archetype, right, of a typical customer service agent, it's definitely going to need to transform the, I guess, expertise or the skill set that these users have, right? In my experiences, what I really do fear happening, right, is especially for these organizations that really do stress volume of output, is they're going to enter in a prompt, they're going to copy, they're going to paste, they're going to send. And I think for organizations that really do pride themselves in being those customer focused organizations, that might not be the best solution. So I think it's going to be a lot of just testing the waters a little bit and really kind of seeing how the tool can be best leveraged. It's not a solution, it's a tool, I think, at least at this point.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think a tool is a good way to describe it. I think one thing they did well that I particularly like, but I suspect that it's because they couldn't do it any other way, is the fact that they've made it open. So they're not saying this is a Chat GPT integration. It's open GPT integration that can work with any of those engines. So I think that sounds like a good message. But since Microsoft announced its partnership with OpenAI a few weeks earlier, I guess that's probably the underlying reason.
I think we see a couple of things here too. The idea of operationalizing AI, it's great to throw Chat GPT out there, but unless you actually put some guardrails around it and enable people to use it in an effective way, it can be the best tool in the world or the worst weapon, right? When you think about the productivity of agents, the productivity of salespeople, the productivity of marketers, great if that's trending upwards in the right direction. But just like, I remember when we started with email and people thought this is a great productivity tool, or it's not. It's a tool and a technology to enable to do that. And I think one of the things that Salesforce really stressed was around not just that it has to be automated, but that it has to be right. Yeah. Right. So as we think directionally, obviously with what's happened with Bing and ChatGPT there, people are saying, I really need to be able to trust this to be right. And I think that's where Salesforce is focused on positioning this differently and saying, we're going to put some guardrails around it. We've got the Office of Ethical and Humane Use working on that. And we're going to make sure that it's not just delivering automated responses, but the right responses. So people
you get the access to the data in the business. So that's the difference, right? I mean, if you're using the Chat GPT engine in the standard open one for everybody, it doesn't have the same access to information, right? It's using an old data set. But if you're using real-time data from a business and that engine starts to be able to consolidate. I mean, it's almost like, and I would say this about CoPilot too. It's almost like enterprise search was 10 years ago or whatever. We were thinking, this is the poor man's integration tool because you can connect all your data into one thing, and that thing then gives you the capability to aggregate that and use it in different ways. So I think that's kind of interesting too.
Yeah,
absolutely.
It's interesting then actually, Michael, that you also mentioned CoPilot. That's another new innovation that came around with ChatGPT, and it kind of goes. I remember I was watching that demo of the live, and I was thinking, wow, just imagine how they're using this data. Imagine if that was Meta or something, and the scrutiny this would be under. It was quite and links into our conversation earlier. I think it's just a fascinating topic, and I'm sure we're going to see. I think InMoment brought out some generative AI for voice of the customer last week. Before that, Nice and Five9 have brought out some generative AI for CCaaS. It's going to be fascinating to see how all this is implemented.
It kind of opens up some additional privacy concerns, though, if you think about it. And you've got Microsoft. There's tons of enterprise data. They have more tools than anybody spread across the enterprise. So I can see a good use case for CoPilot. But at the same time, we haven't solved the data privacy issues we already have. What are we going to do when we connect these AI engines, chat GPT type engines, to all your customer data, all the transaction data, all the personal data? It opens up a whole different sort of discussion around privacy, I think.
Yeah, and exactly. I think the key word there is trust, like Rebecca said. When at least in the people I've spoken to, that are just kind of giving their first impressions of it, is there could very well be some reservations from these folks that are saying, yes, you can have access to effectively all of my internal private company data. I think there will be some, again, some reservations there. But what really make this tool different, like Mike said, is the fact that it's operating on both private and public data. That really is the key differentiator. Because otherwise, there'd be nothing stopping from anyone from just using ChatGPT-3 and just using that alongside it. Like, that private data is really what matters. And obviously, the models are going to get better over time too. Using our CX example, right? Every customer service team has those few that kind of go above and beyond, right? Your stars of the team, if you will. So imagine being able to train a model based off of the types of interactions that those people are having. I think that is where maybe in a year or 2 years time is what's going to be really holding a lot of value, because now all of a sudden you're sort of elevating everybody to be acting them conducting themselves in a way that's more similar to, I guess, your star pupils, if you will.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And yeah, just on the privacy point as well, I thought it was very interesting when Microsoft, I think they ditched their ethical AI team. The week they made that announcement.
They have a secret unethical AI team now.
Yeah, and with the Salesforce, I guess they did also commit to I think a $250 million fund to make this ethical.
Well, with Salesforce Ventures, they put out that $250 million to create an ecosystem around GPT and also to
Yeah, it's a fascinating topic, and one that I'm sure we do this about every month now. It will keep coming up every month.
Yes.
There will be more to talk about. Oh yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think maybe just to close this, sorry, Michael, did you want to say something?
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I was just going to add one more thing. I think it's kind of interesting to think about the two tools, right? Microsoft Teams and Slack. If you connect them and you start to use that, and we already know Salesforce is kind of trying to use Slack as a new OS for the whole business. And if you add in the GPT engine, I think that gives you some really interesting opportunities with that data and with all the other connected data to really, integrate across the team. So and obviously works the same in Teams as well. So I just think that's an interesting addition now that they both, and those are the two leading, collaboration tools out there. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they've been doing that with Einstein AI, but as you said, they also brought out Einstein GPT, didn't they? Which is, as we've discussed, the idea of having that run between CRM and the contact center, which they brought out, is, it's a very good one. And just to move on to the final topic now. We just discussed this a little bit before the call, so I think it's maybe a little bit worth just bringing up. I believe there's some news on Twitter and their valuation you want to discuss. I don't know who wants to go first on this one.
How to lose a company without really trying. Congratulations. I mean, we know Elon's competitive, but boy, he's really outdone himself.
Yeah, it may be a record, that is for certain.
Yeah.
Well, it happened pretty immediately too. I remember, like, this is maybe a week after he acquired it, but he basically said, way more of these accounts are bots than I realized, which by nature makes the value of those advertisements way less valuable. So I think he kind of realized, very quickly, and now it's just more, set in stone. Like, yeah, maybe this isn't going as positively, I guess, as he maybe once had hoped.
I want to know is the bot thing, because he's used that forever. Is that really is it an excuse or is it a cause? And I'm not sure I can tell. Now, don't get me wrong, I know there are bots on Twitter. We all do, right? And we've probably all been spoofed by one once in a while. But you just have to wonder that to drop that much valuation in that short a period of time. And the other thing is, I feel it's been a tough environment for all those employees, but think of the employees with their options now, and what are they, the ones that are underwater, and then the new ones, and are they repricing? And it's just from an employee standpoint, that's been a horrible year for them.
Well, Elon's got a real employee problem, whether it's the ones who used to be there or the ones that are still there. And if you think about company valuations, you're paying for total addressable market, but you're also paying for talent. That's baked into any valuation you're looking at, right? And he's hacked away at the talent, lost the advertisers, and there's no sign that either of those groups are trending upward for Twitter.
No, I feel like that's an interesting excuse across a lot of the layoffs in general. have been this idea that, oh, well, we're all working remotely, productivity's down, we hired a lot of new people, all those things. They sound like good excuses, but you have to dig underneath that. And I don't know. Overhiring's a bad thing, but gutting a company is, I don't understand. I just don't understand the business approach, right? Why do I get rid of the most talented people? Because they're the ones who can afford to leave because they can get another job. So why do I do that? I don't know.
And if I take a disorganized approach and have people printing out code on pieces of paper, it's not a huge surprise that some of it ends up on GitHub. I think the more amazing thing to me is that it was there for months and nobody caught it.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. The disorganization is really bad. I think it went viral on LinkedIn a couple weeks ago, but there was basically a Twitter employee that basically had to resort to, tweeting at Elon Musk like, hey, do I still work for you? So, their entire organizational structure is really broken. I mean, this guy was effectively doing nothing for months, right? And no one ever even caught wind of that. So I think, it's very disorganized. He's trying to change, I think, too much too quickly. And that's really hard to do for an already, established organization that has a certain way of running things. And you can't be changed overnight. And this is, I guess, the result when you try to, reinvent the wheel super quickly.
Yeah, we also have to be able to articulate a vision that people will get behind. And I have not seen any of that articulated vision. So
yeah, gutting the place is not a vision.
No, no.
Yeah. I must admit, I haven't kept up to date with that story, but from that story of the Twitter employee on LinkedIn to the code going live on GitHub, I don't know, I must have been hiding under a rock or something. But yeah, it's fascinating stuff. And I think that wraps up our conversation very nicely. We've covered many bases, and I'm sure there's Enterprise Connect later this week as well. So lots more news to come from the CX world. But I think that's a great place to end today's chat. Thank you to all our expert analysts for joining me, and for everybody for watching too. Bye for now.